Hello and welcome to Talk to Stu with me, Stuart Magoo. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about how to apply for disability housing. So stick with me, but before I do the little thing where the logo spins round and signifies the start and the next bit, carrying on, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. That's the thing everyone has to do. You have to do it. There's no choice. Of course there's a choice. Do what you like. Anyway, logo. Okay, so what are we doing? What are we talking about? We're talking about how to apply for disability housing. Why is this important? Well, if you are living in a property that isn't suitable for your disability needs, then it might be that you're able to move into a property that is more suitable for you. So, how do you know if you're eligible? Well, the first thing to think about is, do you have a disability that is negatively affected by the property that you're living in, and would you be better if you lived in a property that was set up to meet your needs? That's the first thing to consider. Your personal view on this is very important. No one should ever feel pressured into leaving their own home. Quite often we might interact with people that say, you should do this or you should do that. And actually we're quite happy where we live. And it may well be that there are adaptations and things that you can do to your own home, which will enable you to stay in that property for a much longer period of time. So that might be the way to go. And if that is the case, then you would need to speak with an occupational therapy assessor who would be able to tell you, an occupational therapist, who would be able to tell you whether or not those adjustments could be made. And indeed, give my video on the Disabled Facilities Grant a look if you haven't already, to find out more about how that might happen if you need to make any quite sizable changes to your property. But let's assume that the property that you're in isn't suitable. Now, the first consideration after that is, what money do you have in the bank? So if you're in a position where you own your own home, or you have a lot of capital in savings, then it may be that you wouldn't qualify for a council property. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you absolutely wouldn't qualify, but it would have to be very special circumstances in which you found yourself in for you to qualify for that kind of support. If, of course, it's deemed that you have the capital either in savings or tied up in property, that would fund you being able to move into a more suitable property, then you would be expected to do so. However, if you are in private rented accommodation, housing association accommodation, or in council accommodation, some people still are in council accommodation, or a property that's really very dangerous and unsuitable for you, and there's no capital in it, so it might be that you've maybe remortgaged and there's no capital accessible to you, and you don't have much in the way of savings, those kind of things, it might be that you are able to qualify for that on a financial sense. So the next thing to consider is, does anybody confirm that you are in need of disability accommodation? So the first thing to do to find that out would again be to request an assessment from an occupational therapist. This is usually done through your GP surgery, but it may be that in your area there are other occupational therapy services that are run by the local authority, or that you might have access to through the council or housing association that is managing your current tenancy. Chances are, if you're in private accommodation, these won't be options that you could access. though there are some local authorities that have occupational therapy schemes that work in a different way. So it's worth checking these things out. And the best thing to do is pop into your local CAB or Age UK or any other disability organisation, support organisation that might be in your local area. As always, I'll put the Turn to Us advice finder in the comment description section below, so you can link through to their website and use their checker to pop your postcode in and see if there's any organisations locally to you that might be able to help you. Now, I always recommend as well having a look on your local authority website if you can, or popping down to your local authority offices if you're able to see if anybody there can advise you or help you with that as well. What generally then is the next step? Well, once you've had your occupational therapy assessment and they agree that you would be better suited in a different kind of property, so it might be, for example, currently you're on the top floor of a set of flats or maisonettes that don't have a lift, so it's just, say, 3 or 4 flights of stairs to go up and you've got a serious hip problem. It might be that the location that you're in is completely unsuitable and that you're not able to get around anymore. You're limited to using a mobility scooter and you're miles away from your GP surgery and things like that. It could be safety considerations inside your property in terms of cooking or getting washed and dressed, things like that. Maybe you're in a wheelchair and the property can't be adjusted to have you moving around indoors using a wheelchair safely. And indeed, it may well be that you need to have adaptations, but you're in private rented accommodation and your landlord, for whatever reason, refuses to have those adaptations made because it would require that they have to make adjustments to the building itself, keep maintenance on those adaptations, and that if you access the Disabled Facilities Grant, the DFG, and were to move out for whatever reason, then they would be in a position where they had to rent it to other people with disabilities. Now, some people like that because it's a guaranteed sort of pool of people that will be looking to rent a property. However, some landlords might not want to do that because it, generally speaking, invites people who are in receipt of universal credit and things like that, and some landlords don't like that. They don't trust it. So it's a free country, as they say, in some respects, so that is up to the landlord to decide. So what do you need to consider next? Well, you need to first of all make your application, and this is done in different ways depending on the area that you live, but it is usually your local authority that manages housing applications. Now, the local authority, most local authorities these days contract that out to organisations that they have commissioned, and they may be private companies, corporations of some kind, or they might be local organisations that have been specifically set up to manage your housing application. Quite often, what we sort of see commonly all across the UK is a website where people are able to, first of all, put in their application and get on the housing register, but also view properties that they may then bid on. And we say bid because it's not a financial bid, but it is in fact a sort of expression of interest, essentially, to say that you would be interested in that property. So, how does the bidding side of things work? Well, ordinarily, when a person registers, they will be decided as to what their level of need is by the organisation that's managing the registration, and sometimes also by the housing department of the local authority. And you will be assigned a value. In some areas they do it sort of platinum, gold, silver, bronze. In other areas they do it at priority level of need, level 1, level 2, level 3. It can be different depending on where you are. Ordinarily, if a person who was, let's say, a single white male who had no dependents and had a reasonable job that paid a reasonable income, put themselves on the register, then they would probably be given a very low priority. However, somebody who is applying on the disability rules would, if their assessment and application was approved, then they would be given a much higher level. So in the platinum, bronze, silver, gold, platinum, bronze, silver, gold, platinum, gold, silver, bronze. Example, the former would be on a bronze and the latter would be on a gold plus or platinum. So yeah, that's sort of how how people are assigned. Once you are given that, you then have the opportunity to bid on a property, which, as I say, is putting in an expression of interest on a property that you might think would be suitable for you. Now, for somebody who is at the lowest level, on a bronze in our example, or might be level 4 or level 5, depending on your area, they would ordinarily expect to wait at least 2 years before they were given priority on any of their bids. Generally speaking, when you place a bid on a property, you can usually see how many other people are bidding on that property. So if you bid on a property and you can see 100 other people have bid on it, then the chances are you aren't going to get that property if you are at the lowest level, because there will be people within that 100 who are at silver, gold and even platinum level bidding on it based on their housing needs. So, as I say, as you wait over a period, the length of time that you've been on the register comes into play. And so your rating moves up as you wait on the register. And usually after about 2 or 3 years, it might be that you are first in the queue when you put a bid on a property and you are then offered that property. Generally speaking, with these systems, people are not given the specific address of the properties that are on there, and they are not afforded the opportunity to go and look at the property or check it out in advance of seeing it. There's a number of reasons for that. One of them, which is the primary one, is that the housing association or local authority that manages that property will have it in a reasonable habitable standard for somebody to move into. Now obviously reasonable habitable standard means different things to different people, and for most people you might move in and find they've got no carpets, no wallpaper and things like that. But most of these properties have usually been cleaned once they are vacated and quite often have been decorated as well, and what should have happened is all the safety checks on fire alarms, boilers and things like that being done also. Now, if you're a person with a disability and your disability application has been accepted, then you will be given a much higher priority, which means that you won't have to wait 2 years to be moved into a property if you bid on one. You will be at the top end of the queue straight away. Now, there may be other people with disabilities in the queue ahead of you, so it doesn't guarantee that if you bid on it, you will get it, but it does mean that you have a much higher chance. Now, what about the disability application? How does that work? Well, generally speaking, most of the websites allow you to put information about your disability or health condition into your application as you make it. However, there are some where you need to write out a separate application. And it's really important that you get across everything to do with your health condition or disability that is affected by the property that you're living in and what you will need from an appropriate property. Okay. You will also need to provide evidence for this. So the evidence will consist of a report from an occupational therapist. So if you haven't got one of those before you start the process, then you will need to get one. And you will also need to have medical records as well that support any diagnoses that you have, and make sure that in fact everything that you're saying in terms of your needs, your mobility, health issues, whatever it is that requires that you be in this kind of property are evidenced in those documents as well. You will also, of course, be subject to other areas of consideration, such as references from properties that you've already been in, and your ability to maintain rent payments as well. So those will be considerations too. But for the disability element of the application, you must make sure that you get across as much information as possible at that stage, including your ability to actually engage with the bidding process in and of itself. By logging into the computer and so on and so forth. That can be quite complicated for a lot of people, and for a lot of other people they may not be able to do it because they're not digitally included, as is the term. So that is something worth considering. Now, generally speaking, once you've submitted that application, it will be assessed. Now, people do get a bit confused with this because quite often, if those two applications are separate, or even if they are a part of the application that you they're integrated in the same application that you make at the start, a person can be assigned a rating and you think, oh no, I've been given the wrong rating, and then a couple of weeks later the disability element of it has been assessed and confirmed and your rating is then increased, so you are further up the queue when it comes to that bidding. Okay, but what quite often happens, and should happen in a great many cases where a person has quite a severe disability or needs that extra support, is this will be assigned to a housing officer that works within the housing department of your local authority. The housing officer is better placed to be able to support you with finding the appropriate kind of property, as they will themselves be aware of properties that are coming onto the market. And when I say the market, I don't mean the market, but within their market, that they're aware of where somebody may have, for example, with older people's accommodation, it may be that a person has passed away and a property has become available and a housing association is in the process of redecorating it and cleaning it up and emptying it out and all those kind of things that go on. And so the housing officer knows that that's in process, has a good idea of when it's going to go through, and they're able to see whether or not that property is suitable for you. Now, an interesting and important thing to remember is that for the majority of people with a disability who apply for this will be in the same position as everybody else on the housing register, in that they will not be, generally speaking, will not be afforded the opportunity to go and see the property, first of all, to make sure that it is suitable for them. However, even though that is the case, it is really important to remember this following two phrases. So the first one is adequately housed, and the next phrase is duty of care. Okay, so it is the local authority's responsibility to make sure that every person is adequately housed, and for a disabled person, it is important that when you are considering taking on a property, you know in advance that this property will meet your needs, with only minor adaptations needing to be made to the property, or if major adaptations be required, that you're fully informed of what those will be and what timescales are involved. Because adequately housed, as I say, intersects with duty of care. So, for example, if you are at a serious falls risk and you're put into a property where there are a lot of trip hazards which need to be removed, and the timescale for that to happen is 6 to 12 months, then it may well be that you're not adequately housed by taking on that property, and that you're at a serious risk of harm or injury from living in that property, particularly if you're moving away from somewhere where you're already at risk of harm or injury. That's something that you don't want to have to do. So it's really important that you have reasonable conversations with your housing officer, if you are assigned a housing officer, or that you make inquiries as much as possible about any property that you're bidding on, if that's the route that you're going down. The ideal situation is to get that housing officer involved so you can ask them those questions. Generally speaking, housing officers are pretty overloaded with work, so getting responses out of them in a timely fashion sometimes can be quite difficult. Now, generally speaking, when you are offered a property, you will be told, more often than not, that if you don't accept that property, you may not be offered any further properties. So it is really important that you get it right from the first instance. But assuming that you've got the right evidence and that your OT assessment, your occupational therapy assessment, has covered every aspect of your disability and your needs, then the property should be suitable for you to move into straight away. Unfortunately, this isn't a situation where we get to have a lot of choice over things. So, for example, if you need a ground floor property and it needs to have a wet room in it, and a property is found for you with a wet room in it, and maybe they need to put some grab rails in or something like that, then you haven't really got a good argument to say no to it. However, if a property were to cause you risk of serious injury or harm from you moving in there, for example, it's only got one bathroom and that bathroom's upstairs and you're not in a position where you can go up and down stairs and there's no stair lift or anything like that in there, then you need to make it very, very clear, first of all, why you would be turning that down. And you could argue at that point that the housing officer hasn't given due consideration to what your needs are. However, if those are your needs, they should also be referenced in that occupational therapy assessment. So make sure anything that you challenge them on is something that you have evidence for before you make that challenge or turn it down. Okay. Even if you do challenge and turn something down, as soon as you are offered something, if you are able to move forward with that challenge and it's accepted, if you are then offered something that does meet those needs, you pretty much have to accept it. Okay, so only veto something if you are absolutely certain that it isn't going to meet your needs and that the housing association or council or whatever aren't going to be able to install what it is that you do need within a reasonable time frame. Things that don't come into it, unfortunately, might be where you're placed. So housing stock is very low. There aren't very many suitable properties available. Now, if you tend to be in the older age group, sort of 60 plus, sometimes it'll be down as 55 plus housing, then it may well be that you would qualify for something that is appropriate for you within a older people's housing area. So it might be sheltered housing, sheltered accommodation, or some sort of community area where certain people of a certain age are all living, a kind of gated community, that kind of thing. If that's the case, then availability tends to come around a little more often. If, however, you are looking for something that sits outside of that, then the availability of suitable properties is a lot less, and so that's something to bear in mind. What you have to then consider is what areas are you looking to move to anyway? So one of the things that you will be asked when you're filling out your application is what local connections you have. So those would be things like, where is your GP surgery, where do your friends live, where does your family live, and all of those kind of things. Generally speaking, if you have no local connections to an area, you won't be able to move to that area. So if you think to yourself, oh, I fancy living on the other side of the county in a nice countryside area, you might not get that option unless you have a very specific connection over there, such as your daughter lives there or something like that. So that's worth bearing in mind. And of course, the local authority don't necessarily have to offer you anything at all. And indeed, any application that you make or any bid that you put in on a property that doesn't meet the local connections rule could be rejected. There are occasions where local authorities will prioritise a person's disability need over the local connection side of things, but it tends to be rare. It's usually when there's a very high level of need and a property is a certain type of property is the only type of property that is suitable for that person, and there's nothing available in the area that they're currently in. Generally speaking, local authorities try to keep you in the same area that you already are. So, for example, if you live in the middle of the city centre, you may stay in the middle of the city centre. If you live out in the sticks, you may stay out in the sticks. So that tends to be what happens. Usually commuting and transport is something that is not factored into this. So it is just about local amenities for people, access to doctors' surgeries, being able to get to your local shop. Are you able to get there on your mobility scooter? Are there bus services or even voluntary transport services in the local area that could meet your needs? If there are, then the chances are that's where you're going to remain nearby to where you currently are living. So these are all factors. So generally speaking, there's not much else for me to say on this, but what I would urge people is, as soon as you become aware that this might be the route that you have to go down, then do that as soon as possible. Get the ball rolling. Make sure you get that referral to an occupational therapist, or make sure you start that application process local to you, because time moves by pretty quickly, and quite often it can be very difficult for a person if they find that they're in a position where they've been making do in a property for quite some time, and then, for example, that private landlord might decide he's going to sell that property, and that person's put in a position of being homeless. Although being homeless does give you a higher priority, and that coupled with having a disability gives you a higher priority, the turnaround time usually, for example, with the Section 21 is 2 months. And generally speaking, this process will take 3 to 6 months if it's operating quickly. It can take much longer for people. There will be people who are prioritised who are in very, not quite critical conditions, but very, very difficult situations, who do need to be moved into a property sooner than you. As we all know, there's always somebody who's worse off, and it may be that those people will be prioritised ahead of you and things like that, and just availability of housing stock as well. Plus the admin time to get these forms filled out and sent off, and then somebody to work down their list and get to your form, and all of those things, it takes time. So start the process as soon as possible, and just be aware that it is a long process, okay? So yes, those are my tips for how to look at applying for a disability suitable accommodation, and some of the things that you need to know. There is a lot more to it than that, of course. I've only just covered this in around 30 minutes, which for some people they might be thinking, oh my gosh, he's going on again. but unfortunately that is the nature of the beast. And yes, if you need further information, there is a lot of information available online. I will pop some links in the description below. Also, if you are in a position where you're facing homelessness, or your house is in severe disrepair, or there's a risk to your safety being in the property that you're in, it might be worth contacting Shelter as an organisation as well. They may be able to advise you on what the best course of action is. And again, look for those local organisations too, as they will be better placed to tell you how your local authority operates and how their your local authority's housing applications operate too. Okay, so if you did find this helpful and my dulcet tones didn't send you off to sleep and you want to do me a solid, then click like, click share, click subscribe, and most importantly, if you want to join us for my live Q&A sessions and get notified of other useful bits of information videos that I might post, then please hit the notification bell too. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all again very soon.